Welcome you all to this mobile app design feedback session. So we do have one of our reviewers here today who will share some of their thoughts based on what they saw while reviewing the apps, some things that will hopefully help you move forward. I also have some notes that I will share with folks. I apologize if you hear loud noises in the background. I live near an Air Force base. They've been doing a lot of training. So we've been having a lot of jets flying over my house, which is kind of cool because I love looking up and watching them do their thing. It just gets really loud. So I am going to share my screen, and these notes that I share will be sent to teachers and shared, so you can have that as well. Why am I not seeing? All right, let me pull it up again so I can get to that. I didn't know, was there anything in general, Laura, that you wanted to maybe start us off with as far as things that you saw while reviewing the apps?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun reviewing them and getting to read the students' ideas. But I was in the other session and Manny mentioned the objective is to have a mobile app that has something to do with human interaction and an impact on your community. And there was some apps that were following this, but there was some apps that weren't. And even though they were good ideas that you can develop, like they were not aligning to the problem or to the objective of this competition. So make sure that your app is doing that. And then some other good things that I saw were sketches. Some students have not started their code yet, but they have like an idea of what they want their app to look like. So reviewing the application, it gave me an idea of the end result of what you would want to have. And then if you cannot get your app to work, it's good to have those screenshots and a prototype at least, and then have those artwork and design, maybe make it into a digital format so that it looks more like an app and not just a drawing. And then for the high school students, some of you were missing your business plans, and it's really important that you have this because it's going to give the judges or the reviewers an idea of the long-term goals for this application. And also for the business plan, you have to include like the mission, what you want, what's the goal of this application, and it would be good to also include that in your final application, like have a page where it's like about us or the so that the people that are reviewing or end up using the app know what your company or your application is really about.
Excellent, thank you. And if you all have questions as we go along, you can unmute yourselves and share those questions with us, or you can pop them into the chat. I'll keep an eye on that as well. And so some of the stuff that I'm going to share will be a repeat of what Laura just shared. And some of that is probably because I took this from some of her feedback that she shared that will be sent. So all the reviews that were done, if you submitted a project, will be sent to your teacher. So you'll get individual feedback. This is more about general feedback based on what we saw and what we think will help people moving forward. We do have a couple people in the room that have experience with coding. So if you have some questions about coding, we might be able to answer those for you as well, as we do have some experienced coders. Not me, but Ryan from GCU is here, and I think Laura, I think you have some coding experience also, right? So those are our technical experts in the room today. But so I'm going to quickly kind of review my notes, but feel free to jump in at any point with questions or thoughts as we go along. So kind of feedback number one, remember this is a human-centered design challenge. So it kind of goes to the note that Laura shared, the fact that you're supposed to be solving a problem in your community. So if your app is not doing that, then you're going to be off base and you're not going to score well. Because if you look at the rubrics and you look at the way that the apps are going to be scored, there's a number of pieces in the scoring that speak directly to, are you solving a problem in your community, and what research are you doing? How do you know it's doing that? What impact is it having? Can you demonstrate that in your app? So that's number one. So people may be like, well, how do I identify a community, right? What do you consider a community? So I mean, it could be a variety of things, right? You should kind of, as your first step, identify different communities, within that you can help. A community could be a city, right? So it could be a problem that's affecting everybody in your city. It could just be something that's affecting people in your neighborhood, right? That might be really specific, but that doesn't mean it might not be able to be applied to other neighborhoods, right? Could be a school, right? Could be your school community. I think we had a couple apps that did target specific people within their school community, which is an easy one, right? Might be a little bit easier to get a hold of people and talk to people if you're working on, and for you to understand the problems, right? Because it might be something that you're facing, right? It's like, I'm solving this problem because me and my friends and everybody else in my school are facing the same problem, right? So we're building this app and we hope it can help people in other schools. But it doesn't have to be located together, right? It could be certain age groups, so retired people, children, college students could be parents, could be people with disabilities. So community is anything that brings people together, right? If they can identify and they have a connection, a group of people, they're considered a community. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach this challenge. And one way to pick it, which is like, which of the communities do you feel you could research and develop a good app for and have access to, right? Who are you gonna be able to understand and help the most and the best and easiest for you? That's probably the community you want to target with your app. Once you've identified your community, then you want to research the problems within that community, right? Either through online research, looking up articles, books, news reports could help with that. And then of course, the most important is talking to members of that community, right? Ask them, what issues are you facing, right? What are the things that you struggle with the most, right? What are things that you could use some help with, right? And they might give you a lot of things. Some of the things you could design an app around, some of the things you can't. So pick one of those things that you can design an app around, or a couple of them if the app can assess more than one. And then go from there and start working on it. And once you kind of research that the community and identify the problem, then you start thinking about, all right, well, what kind of features and functions can my app have, right? So you're going to go through that brainstorming process. Let's throw everything out there. It could be, and then pick which ones you think you could do well, that you can do within the time constraints, right? One of your constraints is time and the ability to work together, because you may not all be co-located, right, in classrooms together, right? And then, like what Laura said, you're gonna start drawing sketches, right? At first, they're gonna be kind of stick figures, right, just to get your ideas moving and thinking of how things might flow and connect. And then they're gonna become more developed, right? So you might do digital drawings, right? And there's probably software and things you could use out there to kind of create that flow, right? A visual idea and flow of what your screens will look like, how the things are going to connect together, how you're going to integrate the functions like a database or a phone sensor, or API keys, right? And you can get almost everything kind of situated and how you want it to look and feel and move, and then start building it and testing it, right? And the testing is going to be really important, right? Because you could have a great idea, but if you can't show that it's feasible, that it could work, it's not going to go very far. So you want to be able to get to the point where you have a good idea of what you want to do, then you can start putting it together. And once you start putting it together, you'll figure out where are the bugs, what are the tricky spaces, and how are you going to fix those. And sometimes that might lead to, well, we wanted to do this really cool thing, but we just can't, right? So we're going to focus on this other thing that we know we can do, and we're going to do that really, really well, right? And then we can say in our next steps, we want to incorporate these other pieces, right? That's always valid too, to say we wanted to do these, we have a vision for the future of this app, and how it can develop beyond what we're turning in for Mesa Day. One thing was to be careful not to use someone else's ideas or work as your own. I mentioned this in the last session. If your app does exactly, if an app that does exactly what yours does already exists, you're just stealing that idea, right? And you can't do that. That's called plagiarism. But if you say, we like this app, and we think we can do something similar, but change it, and not change it to mean like, well, it was this orange figure, and we're going to make it a red figure, right? That's not, you're not really changing it, right? You're saying it does this, we're going to have it do that, but we're going to have it do it this way, or we're going to have it do it differently, or we're going to add this to it. Now you're just using that as inspiration, and you're building something new. So remember, you got to build something new that's your own. And then just a reminder, if you're using artwork, music, memes, they could be copyrighted. If they're copyrighted, you're going to have to ask permission from the person who owns that copyright to use it. That's especially true for like music. Or if not, if you're just taking something that someone posted online, at least give them credit, right? Don't take credit for their work as your work, but say, we really love this work, right? And we're putting them in the credits, right? We're putting the mention into them, into our app, right? The Explore Design test, so again, making sure you're going through that process over and over and over again, right? Once you test it the first time, you're not done, right? Because you're going to figure out things that are wrong with it. Then you're going to go back to the beginning, explore those things that are wrong, redesign, and then test it again and keep going over and over and over again. Make sure you read the specs, know all the requirements, constraints. Don't lose points because you missed something, right? Again, make sure you're covering the checklists, using the rubrics, using the score sheet to help you make sure you include everything. Use the resources that we have on the website. We've got the link here, which I will see if I can copy and paste in the chat. And then if you have any questions beyond today on the specifications, you can find out if someone else already asked that question and if it's been answered at this page that I'm pasting, or you can send us an email to azmesa@email.arizona.edu. So those were my notes. So now's a good time to ask questions, or if Laura and Ryan, if there were things, ideas or thoughts that you had pop up as I was kind of doing these reviews, feel free to pop those in at this point. But now this is kind of your all's time to ask questions.
I want to add something about the plagiarism. There was some questions from students and when I was reviewing them, and I didn't know the correct answer, but yes, it's not correct to take someone else's work. But for example, there was a couple of projects there regarding like recipes, and I worked on similar things regarding like recipes and food applications with other teams, but the ideas that you guys were trying to get at are not what I did. So similar in that subject, but not the same function. So it has to be different. And Manny did a good analogy of saying like you just change the color doesn't mean that it's completely different, because what's actually happening is the function behind the app. So right. I wanted to add that.
Yeah. And if you're putting this as an idea that you want to try to get people to back you on, right, and maybe sell and make money off of, they're probably going to know that. So they're going to be like, well, we could buy it from these people for this much. So how is yours different, right? Why is yours better? How is it more effective? How does it help the people that you're trying to help better? So keep that in mind, and like recipes, right? There's so many recipes online and they're just out there for anyone to use, which is great because, and that may be part of your function of your app is like, you tell us what you want to make, like in this example recipe based on what ingredients you have. And, we've already done the work. So we'll connect you to a recipe on a website, right? So actually you're helping that website because you're not stealing the recipe, you're directing traffic to them. right? Who knows? Sometimes you can monetize things like that, make money off of things like that, while helping people at the same time, right? It's a win-win.
Let him play with Koji.
I know, he loves Koji. He really does. He's obsessed with Koji.
Here. Take that to throw that in the trash and then put that in the dirties.
Tail's gonna fart.
Anybody have any questions?
I know it's
Questions?
Yeah,
So our first question is
gonna end.
specifications on our project. Should the specifications be for just the app project in general, or specifically what our idea needs to be successful? And then the second one was, what are some examples of like experiments that you can do for your app?
what was the first question again? I want to make sure I understand it.
That like when you're doing when you're filling out what our specifications are, should filling it out what we need to be successful just in general in the app project, like similar to what's on the website, or specifically what we need to be successful for our idea, like our specific idea.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you should be sharing what you consider would be success for your app, right? The specifications are laying out what you should be doing for the project, but the information you're going to share with us is more about your specific project. Tell us what were the success criteria that you set out for yourself. It should meet the criteria that we're asking of you, but right, based on the problem, the community you're serving, the problem that you're trying to address, what's going to be, how are you going to assess yourself as being successful, right? We know we're going to make sure that we're doing this for that community, that we're solving this problem. These are the criteria that we're basing our success on. It should have this impact. And so then in your business plan and the other things, you can say, we were successful because the people told us it was a great app. They said it helped them with that problem, right? They want to share it with other people within their community because it did a great job. So that's how you'll know you're successful, and then it'll show us that you're successful, and then we can score you based on that. And then the second, on the testing piece, Laura and Ryan might have more information, but really it's like, you know, once you kind of get into the development phase in your coding and programming, right? If you click a button and it's not doing what you thought it was going to do, then you know you got to go back and check your code and figure out why it's not doing that, right? That's the simplest version, but they might have more specifics on different strategies and ways to do that. And I think part of that too is depends on how you're coding your app, right? So if you're using like something like MIT App Inventor, like MIT App Inventor and Thunkable were ones that Technovation uses because they have online emulators, right? So basically you have through the browser or through the app that they have installed, you can have a fake computer screen, right? It's not a real phone, but it's like basically like a phone that's sitting there on your screen. And if you run your app, you can see if it's doing the things you're supposed to do. And if not, then you can go back and you may take notes, right? It didn't do this, it didn't do that. It took me to the wrong place. It got glitchy when I asked it to do this, right? It did it, but it was slow. You can take all of those notes and then go back and like check your code and figure out where the issues are happening and why it's slowing down or not going to the right place. So if you have an emulator, something where you could basically mimic a smartphone, that's what's going to help you figure out if it's working or not.
Yeah, and I could add something onto that, specifically for, well, pretty much any one of these, but for Swift and Java, which are the more advanced ones. When you guys are programming your app, remember that computers only do what you tell them to do. So if something was working fine and then you added something and it no longer worked, go ahead and see what you did. If it's going to the wrong page, well, look at the code that makes that code transfer. Maybe there was something that you asked the computer to do, or some line of code that you did, and it was pointing to the wrong spot. Because again, computers will only do what you tell them to do. And so you can use that if something is going wrong to figure out exactly why, and kind of backtrack the problem to where you typed in the code, or where you dropped in the block that would send it to another place.
Yeah, you have to do a lot of testing, and something else I will add is if you know that you're gonna make a big change to your code, make sure that you save a version of what is already working, and then once you make that change, document what you did and what you're planning to do, and then see if it works. And if it doesn't, then write it down in that notebook, and make sure that if you're trying to do something similar, that you go back to like what worked there and what didn't, so that you're not going back into a loop of going into mistakes and mistakes, and just to be able to move forward. And just a lot of testing, and then once you have your thing ready, test it out in different devices to make sure that it works for not just you but for everyone, because this app goes out into the real world, a lot of people are going to be using it, so making sure that a lot of people can use it and that it works for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? It's like because you already know what it's supposed to do. So when you test it, right, everything makes sense to you. But if you're not having people that aren't familiar with the app test it, to be able to tell you like, this was confusing, or this was, I don't like the way that this worked, right? That's going to help you kind of make your app better for other people to use. Which is why a lot of times we ask people to read our Mesa Day specs and stuff like that, because like I read them very differently than someone else would read them. So something that makes sense to me is not necessarily going to make sense to you when you read the specifications, right? So that's part of that testing phase. Especially when you're designing for other people. Can the other people use it? Thank you. That was good.
Yeah, and even large corporations struggle with this sometimes. There are apps that they roll out, and they use groups that they'll try the app and they'll say, well, I don't quite know how to do this, and they didn't realize it was behind a menu, or maybe just the way that you type in information just could be a lot faster. Give it to other people, friends, family, parents, certainly your instructors, and say, hey, would you try this? Could you see if you could do this thing that my app is supposed to do, and kind of watch how they use it. If they're doing something in a particular way that that you didn't expect, maybe you could realize that, oh, maybe that was a faster way to do it, or maybe this wasn't obvious. So use other people. A lot of people love to give feedback, and getting that just to make your app the most efficient is definitely going to help your project score better.
And make sure you're trying to get a lot of different type of people too, because I know that's one of the things that's come up. It's like a lot of times when they do product testing, right, they may test it amongst a group who are like very similar in very similar identities, right? So like that was one of the issues with face recognition software at first, is they didn't plan face recognition software to recognize different skin tones, right? So then they had to make adjustments, right? So think about, there's a pretty diverse group of people who will likely use your app. So you don't want to make sure that you're only testing it with people who think and act and see the world similarly to the way you see it, right? Who are those other people that might be using it that you're not thinking about? Because it's something called universal design. Can your app be used by any? Maybe not, because you're making it for a specific group of people, but there's still, that group of people have other identities. So you might be making it for people in your school, but there are going to be people in your school who, come from very different situations, backgrounds, family histories, speaking different languages, right? You might have students with hearing disabilities or visual impairments, right? How are they going to use your app? Do you want to design for them, or do you not want to design for them? If you want to make sure that they can be included, see if you can get them to test it. It may not be possible, we understand that, but then that's where you can talk about in your next steps, right? It's good and it works for this group of people. The next step is to take it to a broader audience and continue to work on it to make sure that it is accessible by other people, right? So I think even if you just show that you had those considerations in mind. That's going to be important in your final products too. All right, so I think we only have a couple minutes left.
I
Any
have one
last
more
question?
question.
Yeah.
We do. We have one more question. So for them to gather their data, what kind of data are you looking for? Like, are we looking for, like, does the app work? What, you know, like, what is the data we're trying to collect for it?
Yeah, it would definitely be, you know, some of the data is going to be in your testing. Did it work? What didn't work? Right. And then making your design choices. But the other part of that testing, right, is the data collected from those trials that you're doing, the testing that you're doing with people, right? So you may say, all right, we're going to ask 5 of our classmates, 2 of our teachers, and all of our parents to try this, right? And after they tried it, here's a survey. We want to know what they thought, like ease of use, right? You know, what was confusing? What worked? Did you like the icons we used? Was the color scheme good? You know, those kinds of things that you want to try to perfect, you might give them a survey, and that's data you're going to collect. And then you're going to say, we collected that data, we looked at it, right? 70% of the people hated the color of the app, right? All right, so I guess we're going to change the color of the app. So that's other pieces of data that you could use. Then of course, some of the data is going to be some of your initial research, which is, you know, these are the problems, these are the issues that people in the community are facing, right? This is the data that says, that backs up our decision to make an app that does X, Y, and Z, because X, Y, and Z were the most pressing issues or the most common problems for people in that community. So that's a different set of data, but would still help inform your choices. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we can have this be the end of the session. Well, thank you all being here. We do have a brief closing. We're just, you know, you're welcome to stay for that. You're not required to, of course, but we thank you for being here. I know I've seen some of you in multiple sessions, which is awesome. Thank you for giving up your morning. Thank you to our wonderful volunteers, Laura and Ryan. We appreciate you being here as well and taking the time to help us out. It's awesome when I have people who know a lot more about mobile app coding than me to be here to share their thoughts. So I appreciate that. And if this is the last that we see of you for today, have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you at Mesa Day, if not sooner.